Current Issues is produced by the CLOSEUP Foundation and is funded in part by the Burger King Corporation.
Hello, my name is Chuck Tampio. Welcome to Current Issues. Today we're going to be taking a look at the post-war Middle East. With us to discuss the issue is Marius Deeb, a professor of political science at George Washington University. Mark Bruzonsky, founder of the Jewish Committee on the Middle East and frequent columnist for magazines and periodicals. And Marvin Feuerwerger, senior strategic fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Also joining us today are students from all over the country who are in Washington this week participating on the CLOSEUP program. Let me start by asking a general question, and maybe I'll start with you, Mark. One of the key issues that the United States must face is a new role for itself in the Middle East as a result of the conclusion of the Iraq War. What do you think that role should be?
Well, you know, the United States has been negotiating in the Middle East really since the 50s, since Eisenhower sent representatives to try to solve the Arab-Israeli problem. The difference now is that there's only really one superpower in the world, that American military forces have shed Arab blood for the first time in history, that in a sense there's a Pax Americana, and that creates a lot of contradictions. We're supposed to be in favor of democracy, and yet we're mostly frankly in bed with the most conservative and reactionary and dictatorial regimes. We're supposed to be in favor of self-determination, yet on the crucial issue of Palestinian self-determination, we refuse even to talk to the representative of the Palestinians, and we provide funds to the Israelis to continue the policies of occupation. So the United States is in a very difficult position now because our values and our stated positions are in contradiction to our actual policies. And as time goes on, I think those contradictions are going to become more evident, and tensions in the region are going to explode in various directions. I think we've got our hands full. At the moment, it looks like an American victory over Iraq, but my own judgment is there are going to be many earthquakes taking place partly as a result of the actions we've taken.
Marvin?
Well, I think the President has laid out very clearly his vision of American policy in the region, touching on four areas, touching on arms control, on security structures of the region, on the peace process, and on economic development. I would add, I think also, and agree with Mark, that there's an important issue of political development in the region. The United States ought to be a force in favor of democracy throughout the region, and should stand for those principles, recognizing the traditional structures there and the dangers that too ardent a push for democracy could bring. But I think that this is an important value for the United States to be promoting in the Middle East as elsewhere.
Marius?
Yeah, I think I have nothing to add except to agree that the most important thing the U.S. can do is to push for democratization in the Middle East and open societies, and especially make sure that coalition members who do not practice democracy or are dictators like Syria or like Saudi Arabia should change the system. Otherwise, the U.S. will change its policy towards them. We are, in fact, in a position where we could be accused of double standards, because it's true the war against Iraq is justified in terms of aggression and occupation of Kuwait, but what about other aggressions? Syria occupies Lebanon, Turkey occupies Cyprus, so what are we going to do about them, you see?
Okay, let's go now to our students for their questions. And I believe this young man has the first question. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Nathan Beckham from Massachusetts. I was wondering, related to the present situation in Iraq, why, if both the Iraqis and the Americans want Saddam Hussein out of power, why don't we just go in there? I mean, I understand that it's against international law, but more people are going to die, more Iraqis are going to die trying to fight Hussein than Americans would die using our technology to get him out. If the whole world and the Americans and the Iraqis in particular wants Hussein out, why don't we just go in and get him out now?
So you would think that the United States should support those forces in Iraq who are trying to overthrow Hussein at the present moment?
Definitely.
How many of the rest of you feel the same way? How many would think the United States should, in fact, try to do that? Looks like about a third of the students in this room feel that way. Let me ask our panelists how you feel. Yes?
Well, before making a comment about that, our opening answers, we have just a few minutes here today, half hour, may have given you the wrong impression. There really are some major differences here. It's one thing for the United States to articulate certain policies, and our president does that with great glee. In August, he articulates one policy. In November, he articulates another. By February, it's another. The reality is that the United States is definitely not on the side of democracy in the Middle East. It works covertly and overtly, very forcefully, to keep undemocratic regimes in power. In other words, very bluntly, do not believe the words of the American government. Take a look much more closely at the reality of American relationships and American policies. Now, directly in relationship to the question, in my judgment, the United States doesn't topple Saddam Hussein, not because we wouldn't like to and not because we don't have the capability, but because we're terribly worried that we cannot control the political forces in the region. We don't know what's going to happen in Iraq. We don't know what's going to happen in Palestine, in Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, and we do not want to be perceived as the power that turned Iraq into a Lebanon. We don't want to be perceived as the power that created a Shiite takeover. These are all possibilities. So on the one hand, we want to do things and we work underneath the table to make them happen, but we don't want history to record that it was us that did the foul deed.
I think
It's possible that what we did in World War II, where we took over the government and then set up a democratic government and left, like we did in Panama, don't you think we could do that in Iraq too?
Of course we could do it, but in my judgment, we only want to do it under the table. We don't want to do it in a way, since we are not going to stay, we are unable to control the region for the future years. We have to be very careful. Our government wants to be very careful that it isn't perceived to bring about the wrong result.
I think the United States, just at least this leadership, doesn't want to be burdened with running Iraq or any Arab country, and I think that's the major reason they haven't done it. I think that you could be critical about this policy, or you could praise this policy. Basically, I think that it is a responsible approach not to want to run another country, and particularly not Iraq.
Well,
Yeah.
we're not running Panama, and we're not running Japan or Germany anymore anyway.
So you would say that it's okay to do this as long as it's on a temporary basis.
Well, it
once
just seems that that's what the
democracy-
Iraqi people want. I mean, we should give them what they want.
Right. Okay.
'Cause
Marius, how do you feel?
Yeah, I think one should make a distinction between the U.S. going to Baghdad and ruling the country and imposing democracy, which I agree with you completely. That's a good option. And the other option is helping the people who are against Saddam, or worse actually than Saddam. If the fundamentalists, Shia fundamentalists take power, there will be a regime which is much worse than Saddam. So it depends. I think not helping the people against Saddam, but imposing a democracy would be good. But that's a different question.
Okay, let's go to our next student with a question. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Isabel Stir from Kinshasa, Zaire, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this. Many people base the real reason for the U.S. intrusion in the Gulf as oil. Furthermore, with oil being a vital resource fueling the U.S. economy, it seems that the U.S. foreign policy is becoming increasingly oil-oriented. And do you have any comments on this issue?
Yes, how much of this war was a fight over oil?
Your question is basically correct. Your conclusion is basically correct. I mean, we did not go to save Kuwait for 700,000 Kuwaitis or to put the emir back on the throne. These are nice little sub-goals of ours. Primarily, we're a colonial imperial power. We went for colonial imperial reasons: money, oil, control. We have client regimes that control most of the countries. This has been going on since World War II. Saddam Hussein represented, as Nasser represented in the 50s and early 60s, a challenge to our imperial control of the region. We have now met that challenge, and from the tone of at least the first question, apparently the next generation of Americans wants us to continue to play such an imperial role.
Of course, you know, I wish the United States controlled many regions in the world, but this is nonsense. The United States does not control the Middle East. The United States did look at oil as an interest. There's no doubt about it. It's a very important interest. But the United States, at least in this context, also looked at aggression as being unacceptable. And the United States was requested by friends in the region to come to their assistance. I think you have to look at a combination of factors. I think you also have to look at the Soviet role in this context. This might have been impossible several years ago, but with an evolution and understanding in the Soviet Union, it also helped facilitate this kind of intervention.
Marius?
I think oil is a factor, but also the investment by the Kuwaitis and the Saudis in this country is a very important factor, and also all over the world, Britain and the West. But I don't think the war's aim is to control the oil wells. I think it's just to make sure that the regimes are friendly to the U.S. And in that respect, the U.S. succeeded.
Okay, let's go to our next question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Allison, and I'm from Massachusetts. And I was wondering your opinions upon how the current members of OPEC should deal with Iraq's refusal to comply with the past OPEC agreements. And if Iraq still refuses to do so, what is in the future for OPEC?
Yes, who would like to respond to that? You can go first. Yes.
I think that, from an American perspective, we shouldn't worry too much about Iraq's compliance or non-compliance with OPEC. From an American perspective, our interest is in non-cartelization of any resource, be it oil, coffee, or whatever in the world. So our hope is that countries operate independently based on their own interests and that market forces prevail. If they would prevail, then oil prices would be lower in this country.
Well, I certainly would have to disagree with the whole tenor of Marvin's approach. The United States, at the current time, doesn't have to worry about OPEC because our client regimes control OPEC. The greatest control over OPEC is Saudi Arabia, which has been the swing producer for over a decade now. Since the Saudi government and our government work extremely closely together, OPEC at the current time is in no danger of pursuing policies other than those that the United States wants it to pursue.
Okay. Let's go to the next question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Julie. I'm from Massachusetts. Why are reservists who were stationed within the United States still at that base now that the war is over?
At which base? In Iraq or in
Stationed within the United States. At a base.
Why are American forces still stationed in the Middle East? Is that what you're...
No, why are American reservists who are stationed within the United States now still at the base that the war is over? They're still at an American base in America.
Well, they're not being released from that. Yes.
Yeah.
And basically, you have to look at how the Army functions, and it's not necessarily doesn't operate on instant, on push-button remote control. It takes time for the Army to gear up. It takes time for the Army to gear down, and I think that's a basic explanation. Just a question of how the bureaucracy functions.
That's only a tactical explanation. The goal of the United States for a long time has been to put military forces into the Middle East region.
Do you see this as a permanent condition now?
It wasn't possible during the Cold War because the Soviet Union potentially could have challenged us and probably would have challenged us at different times in history. Now the region is so unstable and there's so many political currents in the region that in order to keep our client regimes and in order to keep our control of the region's resources, we feel the necessity to establish, yes, a permanent American presence of one kind or another.
This has nothing to do with her question, though. I mean, we have enough forces in the world. If we wanted to keep that presence, we could do so with active forces. The reserve call-up, your question, is basically a question of how the bureaucracy functions and how long it takes to release these people.
Okay. Let's go to our next question. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Christine. I'm from Washington State. If it comes down to dividing the land between the Palestinians and the Jews in order to achieve peace between them, what would the U.S. policy be, and what is your view on how the land would be divided?
Okay.
Well, our organization, the Jewish Committee on the Middle East, established itself a number of years ago, frankly, because we thought American policy toward the Palestinians was atrocious. That to have the United States financing Israel's occupation of the Palestinians, making it possible for Israel to torture and quite literally murder. I mean, Americans are all concerned now about what happened to the Kuwaitis. What happened to the Kuwaitis, of course, was done by the Iraqis, and it was terrible, and Saddam Hussein is obviously not a very nice man. But anybody who looks at the figures of what's being done with American money and with American support to the Palestinian people, quite literally, it isn't discussed very often in this country, but quite literally, torture, murder, curfews of the worst kind, weeks at a time. People are confined to their houses, mass arrests. It's a lawless environment. It's a travesty on American foreign policy. It should be changed. It should be changed quickly. Unfortunately, American rhetoric and American policies are almost totally contradictory. The rhetoric is designed to keep the American people from facing the contradictions of our government's policies.
If I can try to answer your question. Mark does have a position which he's advocating. I think the American position has been that this is the kind of thing that should be worked out among the parties. whether it be with the Jordanians, whether it be a Jordanian-Palestinian delegation, that the American approach has been territory for peace. There should be a territorial compromise, but the exact demarcations are not something the United States is going to declare. And I think that contrary to what Mark says, that we've seen in the violence in this region and the thousands upon thousands of people killed, that the Israeli occupation has been far more humane than we would have thought in the context of press coverage in this country.
I would have to add something to that. It's really not fair of Marvin to say these things and not identify himself as someone that works closely with the Israeli lobby, the Jewish and Israeli lobby here in Washington. Obviously, there are different positions held by American Jews, by everyone in this country, but anyone who wants to see what's happening to the Palestinians simply has to go over there. It's available for everyone to see. Even Amnesty International has started condemning Israeli policies, and Marvin's certainly entitled to his views, but he certainly should tell you that his institute is closely affiliated with the Israeli lobby here in Washington.
Again, if I may respond,
yes.
It's simply not true. Mark engages in character assassination as a basic principle. He continues it on this program.
I don't know what you're talking about, Marvin.
Okay, let's get to the student questions. Yes, you're next. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Karen, and I'm from Massachusetts. You just spoke about the Palestinians, and I was wondering, do you think there's any real possibility of the abolition of the Palestinian Liberation Organization? And if so, what should the U.S. policy be on that?
Well, I heard Avi Eban speak in San Francisco 2 days ago, and on this particular issue I would agree with Mr. Eban. It's never before in history has the party to the dispute not only wanted to choose its own negotiators, but insisted on choosing the negotiators for its adversary. The PLO obviously represents the Palestinians. All Palestinians know this. The Israelis have for 20 years tried to find other people to negotiate with. But because the Israelis are not prepared to make a political settlement with the Palestinians, they refuse to talk to the PLO because they say there's nothing to talk about. And that's true. As long as the Israelis insist on occupying their land and treating them like the blacks in South Africa are treated, there really isn't anything to discuss. But the PLO, I'm afraid, is here to stay in one form or another. It doesn't matter who its leader is. The PLO is the representative of the Palestinian people.
It's really up to them. I mean, we don't know if it will be abolished or not. The PLO, when it was established, was an instrument largely of the Arab states. It, of course, transformed to become the symbol of the Palestinian people. Whether they find the organization to have been functional, useful, or whether it has been it has not made use of the opportunities that were available is something that the Palestinians, both in the West Bank and Gaza and outside, will have to decide.
So, Dean, what do you think of the siding of the PLO with Iraq? Is it going to hurt their future?
No, it's not going to hurt their future because the PLO sided with Iraq because the sentiment of the Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza are with Iraq. But the reality is that all the countries which are part of the coalition, eventually they have to come to terms with the problem, the Arab-Israeli problem, and they have to support the representative of the Palestinians. And as long as the PLO is the representative of the Palestinians, they are going to pay them money and make peace with them. I think Arafat was too clever. He can have the cake and eat it, support Saddam and get the money from anti-Saddam forces.
Okay, yes, I think that young lady is next. Yes.
My name is Iman. I'm from Kinshasa, Zaire. This question has been bothering me since the war. Now that the U.S. has emerged as the one and only dominant superpower in the world, with the Soviet Union dwindling, what is to prevent the USA carrying out a dictatorial foreign policy without the competition of the USSR?
Very little. That's what we're living through now. We're doing it in a crafty way. We're doing it using international institutions. We're doing it paying off various governments. I mean, the best example was Egypt, which almost $15 billion in debt were forgiven Egypt because of the role that Egypt was willing to play on our behalf in the recent crisis. So the answer to your question is that is the situation at the moment.
I think Mark, again, has a very skewed view of the world. The United States has promoted democracy in Latin America. The United States has promoted democracy in Eastern Europe. And I think that the policies we'll be pursuing, of course, will take account of economic interests and political interests in the United States. but also have a much broader ideological orientation toward promoting democracy for people throughout the world.
Yeah, I think the U.S. presence in the Middle East, if it's a physical presence as well as policy in the Middle East, are, I think they are good. However, we have to live up to these ideals which we all the time talk about. In other words, it's true that the U.S. has promoted democracy in Latin America and Eastern Europe, but I think they have to promote democracy also in the Middle East, and we're waiting for that.
Okay, where's our next question? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Janet. I'm from Massachusetts. I have another question about the land, Palestinian land. Ever since Israel was declared a country, there have been problems between the Arab nations and itself, and most of them have been settled by Israel giving up land. Is it really fair that in this war, which Israel did not retaliate in, that they've already had land destroyed by bombs, and that now they're being asked to give up even more land for peace in a war that really had no retaliation or violence?
The issues of which you speak existed before the invasion of Kuwait and before this war. The issue of Israel's occupation of Arab lands, the United Nations has been passing Security Council resolutions about it ever since 1967. I mean, the irony is that George Bush tells us that United Nations Security Council resolutions are important enough for us to send 500,000 men around the world to liberate a small country like Kuwait. But the United States not only violates all the Security Council resolutions passed about the situation in Israel and Palestine, but the United States helps Israel to violate and defy these resolutions. It's really quite an ironic situation.
Ken, I think that to accuse the United States of violating these resolutions is, again, nonsense, but the issue that is there is an important issue, and we should work on solving it to the extent possible with the parties involved, as we did before. We have to be sensitive to the concerns of Israelis and of Palestinians and of others who've been through a trauma in this conflict. I think the President has indicated his desire to spend a great deal of effort on this problem. I think that's the right approach, and we should do the best we can to try to bring this conflict to a conclusion.
Is it really the United States' business, though, to go in and try to say who the land belongs to?
I think this should be subject to negotiations. It is the American business to try to bring about a peaceful solution. We believe in this kind of a thing. We're friends with most of the parties who are parties to this dispute, and I think we have a moral obligation to try to work on it, but not to dictate a solution.
Well, the unfortunate thing in this situation is the United States is not a neutral party. The United States is providing an unprecedented amount of money each year to the government of Israel, a very small country, which makes it possible for the government of Israel to occupy the lands of the Palestinians on the West Bank and the Gaza and to defy the entire world community. So granted, the atmosphere in the United States is one of discussion of how even-handed and peace-loving we are, but anybody who goes to the region, and I've been there probably 150 times in the last 15 years, anybody who goes to the region knows that the rhetoric of American officials in Washington is so hypocritical, and in the region itself our policies are quite different than what we're told our policies are.
Let's go to our next question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jen Burns. I'm from Danvers, Massachusetts, and I was wondering, we supported Saddam Hussein in this war, well, previously to the war, by way of giving him military aid in the war against Iran. Will it still be our policy to support our so-called allied nations when they may turn against us in the near future? And if it is, how can we make sure who we give it to will still be our friends?
Marius, would you like to start first?
Yeah, I think it's a very legitimate question, your question, especially that we have friends who are, to say the least, are unsavory, you know, like Syria, which has been involved in terrorism against the West, has killed hundreds of American, American citizens, whether Marines or in 1983 or the Pan Am 103 in 1988, civilians. And I think it's a question which we should be very careful, because the mistakes we made with Saddam might repeat them with Syria, but repeat them either with regimes which, like Turkey. Turkey still occupies 40% of Cyprus, and has done nothing about it for the last 17 years. So I think this is an issue which is important. We should help them as long as they fulfill what we demand from them in terms of not occupying their neighbors, not engage in terrorism, and democratize if possible.
Okay, and if there's no response, let's go to the next question. Yes.
Yes, Christopher from Rochester, New York. One of you stated that the USSR is no longer a superpower. Do you believe that this is so? And what will they play in a peacekeeping role in the Middle East?
Future role of the Soviet Union in the Middle East.
Well, the Soviets are not a superpower in the sense that they were before. They don't have the ability to spend the money to provide the arms for free they could before. But they do have historical interests in the region, and they do have close relationships with some of the governments. So I think that one should not totally discount them. At the same time, the United States has much more freedom of action and capability to operate in the region than it had before.
Yeah, I think the USSR that is not anymore a superpower, and therefore the US is really playing the major role in the Middle East, and I think it's good that the US is playing a major role. The important thing is that the US should use that role positively to resolve the conflicts in the region. Because previously to the end of the Cold War, the USSR was playing a negative and undermining the policy of the US and working against peace. But now I think it's a test for the US to work for peace as the USSR is out of the region, primarily from the Gulf, and even in the whole region in terms of influence and having clients. All the clients of the USSR now, they're turning to the US directly or indirectly, and I think this is a positive development.
Okay, let's go to our next question. Yes, sir.
Hi, I've already introduced myself. I'm Nathan from Massachusetts. I was wondering, I would tend to agree with Mr. Bruzonsky that
Nate, hold your microphone up, please.
I'm sorry. That you
got to be short, Nate.
Okay. All right. Basically, why? Why does the United States support Israel if they're wrong? That's what I want to know. Why are we always pro-Israel and anti-Arab?
Well, it would be nice if our foreign policy were really based on democracy and self-determination and freedom. Obviously, our policy is not. Our policy is based upon economic and financial benefits that derive to us from controlling resources, money. Certainly, it's not only oil. At this point in history, there are hundreds of billions of dollars in capital, which are controlled by regimes in the Middle East that are friendly to us and could make life economically difficult for us if they were to do things on their own rather than in coordination with us. So unfortunately, I don't agree with the other two panelists this morning. American rhetoric is largely designed to keep the American people acquiescent in these policies. The reality of our policies is that we are anti-democratic, we are working against self-determination, we are working in favor of Israeli military control of the region.
Marvin, I'm going to have to give you the last word. I'll give you 15 seconds.
15 seconds. The United States supports Israel because most American people think it's the right thing to do and because it's a democracy.
Okay, unfortunately, that is going to have to be the last word. We're out of time, but I would like to thank our guests, Mr. Deeb, Mr. Bruzonsky, and Mr. Furwiger, for being with us today. I'd also like to thank our students for their very insightful questions today. I'm also glad that you're with us, and please join us again. Until next time, I'm Chuck Tampio for the CLOSEUP Foundation.
CLOSEUP Current Issues is produced by the CLOSEUP Foundation and is funded in part by the Burger King Corporation.